In the vast archives of human history, in those spaces where official records have been deliberately altered and rewritten, there exists a presence so powerful and so fundamentally threatening to established power structures that her very name was systematically erased from human memory. She was a queen, yet not in any conventional sense. She was a keeper of ancient wisdom, a guardian of sacred knowledge, a being whose authority derived not from conquest or domination, but from her direct communion with the divine source itself. Her reign represented a moment in human history when power was understood not as dominion over others, but as service to the awakening of consciousness. Yet this understanding was deemed too revolutionary, too liberating, too threatening to those who sought to maintain control through hierarchy and the perpetuation of ignorance. What was the true nature of this queen who was removed from history? What power did she possess that warranted such systematic erasure? And why do ancient symbols continue to whisper her name, calling those ready to listen toward the recognition of what has been deliberately hidden? I discovered the first indication of her existence during a moment of profound recognition while cataloging ancient artifacts in a private collection. As a clinical psychoanalyst and scholar of esoteric traditions, I had spent years studying the hidden layers of human consciousness and spirituality. Among the artifacts was a crown unlike any I had ever encountered, crafted from materials that seemed to contain properties beyond ordinary understanding. The crown bore inscriptions in a language that predated all known linguistic systems. Yet as I held it, I experienced a vision so vivid and so overwhelming that it shattered the boundaries of my ordinary consciousness. I saw a woman of such radiance and such profound authority that my entire being trembled with recognition. She wore this crown not as a symbol of dominion over others, but as a vessel through which divine consciousness flowed into the world. She spoke to me directly, her voice resonating in dimensions beyond ordinary hearing. I am the one they tried to erase. I am the queen whose name was removed from every record, whose teachings were distorted, whose very existence was denied. Yet I have never ceased to exist. I continue to work within the depths of human consciousness, calling all beings toward the recognition of authentic power and authentic authority. From that moment forward, I became obsessed with uncovering the complete truth about this queen and what her erasure signified for human consciousness, driven by a compulsion that transcended ordinary curiosity. The call was undeniable, a resonance so deep that it seemed to emanate from the very core of my being, urging me to seek the knowledge that had been hidden, to restore the narrative that had been systematically obscured. My investigation led me to discover a hidden network of guardians and scholars who had preserved the knowledge of this queen across generations of suppression and distortion. They called themselves the Keepers of the Forgotten Crown, and they maintained archives containing texts and knowledge that predated all known historical records. Through their guidance, I learned that this queen had ruled during an epoch when human consciousness had achieved a level of sophistication and spiritual maturity that subsequent civilizations had never matched. She had understood that authentic power derived from alignment with divine will, that true authority came from the capacity to channel divine consciousness into the world, that genuine leadership meant facilitating the awakening of others rather than dominating them. She had established a system of governance based on the principle that all beings possessed inherent divinity and that the role of leadership was to help others recognize and activate this divine potential within themselves. This understanding was revolutionary because it implied that power was not something to be hoarded or defended, but rather something to be shared and multiplied through the awakening of consciousness in others. This knowledge threatened every power structure that had been built upon the premise that power was finite, that it had to be concentrated in the hands of a few, that the masses had to be kept ignorant and dependent. The response had been swift and merciless. The Queen was declared illegitimate, her teachings were distorted or destroyed, and a systematic campaign was launched to erase her from human memory and replace her with narratives that emphasize the necessity of hierarchical control and masculine dominance. Yet the Keepers explained the erasure had never been complete. Fragments of her truth had survived in coded form, woven into the myths and legends of various spiritual traditions, preserved in the hearts of those who had encountered her presence directly. As I delved deeper into this forbidden knowledge, I encountered formidable resistance. Within myself, the historical training that had defined my entire career seemed to crumble. Am I abandoning all scholarly rigor? I questioned, or am I finally discovering the true foundation upon which authentic history had been built? Fear gripped me as I began to understand the magnitude of what I was uncovering, the potential to overturn not just historical records, but the entire understanding of human civilization and the nature of authentic power and authority. Externally, I faced subtle but persistent opposition. My research was sabotaged, my funding mysteriously withdrawn, and I received warnings, both veiled and direct, from individuals who seemed to represent powerful interests invested in keeping this knowledge buried. I experienced the loss of professional standing, the fracturing of academic community, and the profound isolation that came from pursuing a truth that the mainstream world refused to acknowledge. The revelations were often disturbing, showing me the systematic distortion of historical records, the deliberate erasure of feminine authority, and the ongoing maintenance of structures designed to perpetuate the illusion that authentic power required domination and control. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The breakthrough came during a pilgrimage to a sacred site hidden in the mountains of Peru, a place known to initiates as the Temple of the Forgotten Crown. Here, in a chamber sealed and protected by ancient wards, I discovered a series of inscriptions that had been deliberately concealed from public view. As I traced the symbols with my fingertips, my consciousness was drawn into a state of profound communion with the presence of the Queen herself. I was transported to a moment in human history when she had reigned, when she had walked among her people as a living embodiment of divine consciousness, channeled into human form. I witnessed her authority, her wisdom, her profound commitment to the awakening of all beings. I understood that she had not been a ruler in any conventional sense, but rather a priestess, a guide, a facilitator of collective awakening. I heard the words of the Queen, transmitted directly into my consciousness. I am the one who understood that authentic power is the power to awaken others to their own divinity. I am the one who recognized that true authority comes not from force or domination, but from alignment with divine will and the capacity to channel divine consciousness into the world. I have been erased, my teachings distorted, my very existence denied, yet I have never ceased to exist. I continue to work within the depths of human consciousness, calling all beings toward the recognition of authentic power and authentic authority. I witnessed the moment when the Queen had chosen to fragment her presence, scattering her consciousness throughout humanity, embedding her truth within the hearts of all beings who possess the capacity to awaken to it. She had ensured that her presence could never be completely suppressed, that her voice would continue to resonate within the depths of the human soul, calling all beings toward authentic power and authentic leadership. I saw how the greatest leaders throughout history, those who had truly transformed consciousness and elevated humanity, had all possessed fragments of the Queen's consciousness, and how their leadership had been shaped by her teachings. I understood that the suppression of the Queen's truth had created a fundamental wound in human consciousness, a disconnection from authentic power that manifested as domination, violence, and the systematic devaluation of all that was nurturing, wise, and truly authoritative. I witnessed the moment when the Queen's consciousness began to coalesce within my own being, recognizing me as a vessel through which her truth could be restored to humanity. The impact was transformative, leaving my consciousness forever altered by direct contact with the presence that had been hidden and erased for millennia. The intensity of this experience left me in a state of profound transformation and integration. I emerged from the hidden chamber in a condition of deep connection with the consciousness of the Queen, my own awareness now capable of perceiving the ongoing presence that continued to unfold within human consciousness and beyond. I retreated to a secluded sanctuary, a place maintained by the keepers of the Forgotten Crown, where I could process and integrate the magnitude of what I had experienced. For months, I remained in contemplative silence, my mind a vast landscape where the boundaries between personal and universal consciousness began to dissolve. The conflicts within me, the struggle between my former historical identity and my awakening to the true nature of authentic power and authority, slowly transformed into a higher synthesis. I understood that the suppression of the Queen's truth had not been the result of malice alone, but of fear. Fear that the full realization of authentic power and its capacity to awaken all beings would lead to a fundamental transformation of consciousness and society. I spoke to myself in the language of symbols and sacred geometry, my thoughts flowing in patterns that mirrored the Queen's ongoing work of awakening and liberation. I began to perceive the world as a living expression of her presence, each awakened consciousness a cell in a vast organism of spiritual transformation and collective awakening to authentic power. I emerged from my retreat with a clear sense of purpose and profound wisdom. I understood that my role was not to wage war against those who had perpetuated the suppression of this knowledge, but to become a living conduit through which the teachings of the Queen could be gradually restored to human consciousness. I began to teach, not in conventional academic settings, but through a series of contemplative practices and sacred rituals designed to reconnect individuals with the authentic power that dwelt within their own being. I wrote books that appeared to be scholarly works on history and spirituality, yet contained encoded wisdom that would resonate with those ready to receive it. I established a network of sacred circles and meditation centers, places where seekers could directly experience the presence of the Queen through their own inner experience. I collaborated with artists, musicians, and spiritual practitioners to translate the teachings of the Queen into forms that could integrate with contemporary consciousness and inspire transformation. My most significant contribution was the development of a practice I called the restoration of authentic authority, a systematic approach to recognizing and integrating the true nature of power and leadership within human consciousness, creating a state of being that transcended domination and allowed for the emergence of authentic service and genuine awakening of others. I understood that the restoration of the Queen's truth would not come through institutional reform or academic debate, but through the lived experience of individuals recognizing themselves as beings capable of authentic power, as leaders whose role was to facilitate the awakening of consciousness in others, as beings worthy of channeling divine authority into the world. As I continued my work, I became increasingly aware that I was not acting alone, that the presence of the Queen continued to guide and support my efforts, that her consciousness continued to awaken within those brave enough to question the official narratives and seek the truth beyond the veil. I recognized that the Queen was not a relic of the distant past, but an eternal reality, continuing to work within creation, calling all beings toward awakening, authentic power, and the recognition of their true nature as beloved expressions of divine consciousness capable of channeling divine authority into the world. What truth about authentic power and authentic authority lies dormant within your own consciousness, waiting to awaken you to the fullness of your potential and your role in the great transformation of human consciousness? And if you like this story, You will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.